Okay, so in this video, I am going to be reviewing the 1980 Strat-O-Matic season that I played with the New York Yankees. In that season, the New York Yankees went 103 and 59, and they beat out the Baltimore Orioles by 3 games to win the American League East that year. In my season, I had the Yankees go 101 and 60. Actually, didn't bother playing the last game of the regular season because the next to last game is the game that I won my 101st game, and I said, okay, well, that's it. The Yankees have won the AL East. Let's move on to the postseason. But before I get into those results, the real reason of this video is to go through some player stats just so we could do a little side by side comparison as to what actually happened in the 1980 Yankee season and compare it to my season in Strat-O-Matic. So, one of the first players that I want to do a comparison of is Willie Randolph. Now, in that season, Willie Randolph had 119 walks, 151 hits, 99 runs scored, and 30 stolen bases. Now, in the season that I played, Randolph walked 131 times with 148 hits, 128 runs scored, and 102 stolen bases. Now, the reason for the bloated stolen bases numbers is because that's just a result of me being a super aggressive Stratomatic player. The way I look at base runners in Stratomatic is this: if you're anything above a 1 to 14, stealing a base, you're running. So I'm a very aggressive player when it comes to, if I got a guy who's an A or double A or even in some cases a triple A stealer, I will basically run you. Even if I'm down 3-0 in the seventh inning and there's 2 outs, a situation where typically you don't see stolen bases. The way I look at it is I'd rather have a guy at second base and try to scratch that run in rather than just have him standing on first base. So that was the reason for the bloated stolen base numbers from Willie Randolph. But just like Randolph was in real life, Randolph was a walking machine in Stratomatic. 131 walks in 150 games. So Willie Randolph, very solid leadoff hitter, and really was a good anchor in that lineup. Secondly, I want to review Reggie Jackson, who that year in 143 games played, you may remember he had 41 home runs that year with 111 RBIs and 94 runs scored. Now, in the season that I played in Stratomatic with Reggie Jackson, came out to 143 games played. I didn't do that on purpose either. It just kind of worked out that way. I think I had Reggie hurt at one point. So I think that's why he only played 143 games for me. I don't remember off the top of my head, but he finished with 46 home runs in my Stratomatic season. So you could see 5 more home runs than he hit in the 1980 season and drove in 130 runs as compared to 111. You could attribute that a lot to the season that Willie Randolph had hitting leadoff and basically always being on base. And Reggie scored 96 runs compared to 94 runs that he scored in the 1980 season. So you can see Reggie Jackson's stats in Stratomatic for the full 1980 season came out almost a mirror image to what he did. The next player that I'm going to go through is the catcher, Rick Cerone, that year, who had a really nice year for the Yankees, hitting 277 with 14 home runs and 85 runs batted in 147 games. That seems like an awful lot for a catcher. In the season that I played with the Yankees, Rick Cerone in 139 games, 13 home runs, 70 RBIs, and a 250 batting average. So once again, you can see the stats are pretty similar. I do remember playing this season, and I do remember Rick Cerone for like the first 2 months just couldn't buy a hit. I mean, he was way, way down. About 60 games into the season, like I would say, like maybe around like Memorial Day or early June, he was hitting right around 200. So Rick Cerone finished the season strong for me. But again, you can see the stats came in pretty comparable to what happened in that 1980 season. Another player that I'm going to go through is Oscar Gamble. Now, Oscar Gamble is a guy who I have played different seasons with different Yankee teams in the past. Um, and this is a guy who I always really like in Stratomatic because Oscar Gamble was always a pretty good on base percentage guy, as well as good left handed hitting power in Yankee Stadium, which is what you want. Now, in that season, Oscar Gamble had 194 at bats. In the season that I played, he had 267 at bats. That's because Oscar Gamble was basically my primary either right field or DH against right-handed pitching, just because I liked his card better than Bobby Mercer's because of the fact that Oscar Gamble had a higher on base percentage and would get on base a lot more. So he did have a little bit of a higher workload. So he finished with 24 home runs, 73 RBIs, and 45 walks. So you could see that his stats in Stratomatic were a little bit bloated compared to what he actually did during the 1980 season. And to just finish up the hitting side with three more players. The first one, Greg Nettles. Now, in that season, Greg Nettles missed about 2.5, 3 months. So, what I did was I just basically put him off to the side. I think it was around mid July or something like that when um, Greg Nettles went on to the DL in that season because that year, you may remember, he only played 89 games. And in those 89 games, he hit 16 home runs and drove in 45 runs. In my season, in 83 games, he hit 21 home runs and drove in 62 runs. So, again, the stats are pretty comparable. Another player I'm going to go through real quick is Bucky Dent. In that season, he played 141 games. In my season, he only played 127 games. I actually got Bucky hurt a couple of times during that season. But you could see with the batting average came out to basically the same that happened in real life. In 1980, he hit 262, and in my season, he hit 267. The last player that I want to go through and really break down his stats because this guy was really the breakout performer in the season that I had played. And that was center fielder Bobby Brown. Now, in that season, Bobby Brown, you could see in 137 games, had 14 home runs, 47 RBIs, 65 runs scored, with 27 stolen bases, 12 doubles, and 5 triples. Now, in the season that I played, it was just one of those things where literally I just rolled really well for Bobby Brown. I mean, it just seemed like no matter where I hit him in the lineup, I would just roll his column. I mean, it was incredible. It's just one of those things that kind of can't be explained. In the season that I played with the Yankees and Bobby Brown, what he did in my season in 130 games, 28 home runs, 104 RBIs, 108 runs scored, 44 stolen bases, 24 doubles, and 9 triples. So that was the one guy who I would say really overperformed in my Stratomatic season. And but you're going to get that sometimes. Sometimes guys just get lucky, and even when you don't roll their card, you roll the pitcher's card and it's a hit, and that's just seemed to happen a lot with Bobby Brown that year. But now to go through some pitcher stats real quick, going to go through a couple of starters here. You could see Tommy John basically finished with the almost the same exact numbers in my season that he compiled during that 1987, oh, excuse me, during that 1980 season. In that season, in 36 games started, he threw 265 innings, went 22 and 9, 16 complete games, 6 shutouts. In the season that I played, 33 starts, 270 innings, 22 and 7, 16 complete games, and 5 shutouts. And when we look at Ron Guidry, you could see he actually kind of slightly underperformed for me. That year when he went 17 and 10, in my season he went 14 and 8. He had 3 shutouts for the Yankees that year, and for me he had one. I actually only had him out there for 189 innings as compared to 219 that he threw for the Yankees in 1980. I think that's from there were a number of starts where Guidry just got absolutely hammered. So there were a handful of starts there where Guidry only lasted one, two, or even maybe even 3 innings. And his ERA that year was a little bloated for me as he finished with over a 4 ERA. Next pitcher I'm going to go through is Rudy May. And this was the pitcher who really had the big standout performance from the pitching end of the season that I played with the Yankees from 1980. In that season, Rudy May started 17 games through 175 innings, went 15 and 5, 3 complete games, and 1 shutout. He had a lot of relief appearances that year for the Yankees. When I was going through the season and I was playing the season, I pretty much for the most part use Rudy May exclusively as a starter from basically, I would say, from July on. So in my season, Rudy May started 24 games through 194 innings, and you could see he really carried the pitching staff that year, going 19 and 3. Now, one of the things that you got to remember when you're going through a season like this is when I got past that 175 inning mark with Rudy May, then every inning you're in your point of weakness. So that was one of the things that I had to kind of manage throughout the season. And I knew I would get to that point by the end of the season with Rudy May. But the thing is that he had such a good card, and I just looked at him as being more valuable as a starter than coming out of the pen. So that was the season for Rudy May. Again, he finished 19 and 3 for me when in 1980 he went 15 and 5. And if memory serves me right, I believe that was the year Rudy May won the ERA title in the American League. I'm pretty sure he won the ERA crown that year. Um, one more starter to go through is Tom Underwood, who had a good year for the Yankees that year. He went 13 and 9 in 27 starts and 187 innings. In my season, he started 26 games through 164 innings, and he went 12 and 5. So again, stats are pretty comparable. And then let's go through the relievers real quick. Goose Gassage and Ron Davis. In 1980, the Goose saved 33 games. For my season, he saved 37. And in 1980, Goose went 6 and 2. In my season, he went 8 and 7. He actually had a little bit of a stretch there midway through the season where he was blowing a lot of games. So, but still finished the season with 37 saves. So that was good. Ron Davis that year went 9 and 3 with, let's see, 7 saves. And in my season, Davis went 6 and 5 with 7 saves. So you could see the stats are very comparable in the season that I played with what actually happened during that 1980 campaign. Now, to go through a couple details about the New York Yankees 1980 Strat-O-Matic team, I would say if you were to compare the 1980 Strat-O-Matic Yankees and compare them to the Baltimore Orioles Strat-O-Matic team, I would say if you were to look at the two teams, you would say the Baltimore Orioles were the superior team. They were the better team. My big problem with the 1980 Strat-O-Matic Yankees was they were not a good defensive team. Specifically in the outfield, they were basically all 3 and 4s in the outfield with pretty high E ratings. So either you would roll the pitcher's card and you would get a fly ball to left field or right. It was always either a single or you would roll a split and it would come up an error. So that 1980 Yankee team in the outfield was very poor defensively. What that Yankee team had going for them in Stratomatic was they played really well to their home park. Obviously, starting pitching was very left-handed dominant. So when you got guys like Tommy John, Ron Guidry, Tom Underwood, Rudy May starting your games and you're playing the game at home in Yankee Stadium and you happen to roll a ballpark effect home run, if it's a right-handed hitter, the ballpark effect home run split for 1980, I believe was either a 1 or a 1 out of 2 on a 20 sided die. So those were basically automatic outs. And then, of course, the 1980 Yankees had their abundance of left handed power, which helped with the short right field porch at Yankee Stadium. Obviously, Reggie Jackson hit a number of ballpark effect home runs that he had his card. Jim Spencer also hit a decent amount of home runs for me in limited playing time. Greg Nettles, I went through his stats in only 83 games played for me. He hit 21 home runs. Bobby Brown hit 28 home runs. So that left handed hitting power is what really carried that Yankee team. Now, the biggest thing that carried my season in Stratomatic with that team to 101 wins. And this was really interesting when I started digging through some numbers. If you were to go on a site like baseballreference.com and look up the 1980 Yankees, you would see that they were really good at beating up on the bad teams that year. And that is really what happened in the season that I played in Stratomatic. So, for example, I mentioned before how the Yankees in Stratomatic in 1980 were the inferior team when compared to the Baltimore Orioles. Well, that showed up during the season because in the season that I played, I only went 5-8 against the Orioles. However, just to go through some teams that I was able to beat up on, I was 10-2 against the 1980 Chicago White Sox, and I could tell you that 1980 Chicago White Sox team in Stratomatic is one of the worst teams that I've ever seen. I might one day have to play a series between the 1980 White Sox and the 1962 Mets because that 1980 White Sox team in Stratomatic was just brutal. I also went, let's see, 10-2 against the Minnesota Twins, so was able to beat up on them. The Toronto Blue Jays, who also were not a very good Stratomatic team, only went 7-6 against them. A lot of that was from the 3-game sweep when Toronto swept me. I believe that series was played in late August, but that was when I had hit a pretty bad slump. And I was sitting there, let's see, on September 10th of 1980 after getting swept by the Blue Jays. I had the 1980 Yankees at 83 and 56, which at that point had me 5 games behind the pace of the actual New York Yankees. So at that point, like I said, I'm 83 and 56. So down the stretch, that meant I went 18 and 5 in the last 23 games in September to get the Yankees to 101 wins. Now, how did I get there? Well, the main reason why I got there was because the Yankees did not see the Orioles in September of 1980. And I just go through the way the schedule was in real life. That's how I ran through my season. I didn't face the Orioles in September, and I was able to clean up on two specific teams, the Indians and the Tigers. Inside of those last 23 games where I went 18 and 5, I went 11 and 1 against the Tigers and the Indians. So that is what got my 1980 Yankee Stratomatic season to 101 wins. Again, going back to what I said before, if you look at the Yankees and the Orioles from 1980 in Stratomatic, there's no question the 1980 Orioles were the better team because the Yankees were able to dominate the lesser teams. They were able to win the division. So that was how I got to 101 wins with the 1980 New York Yankees. Now, going through the results of the postseason, we got the Yankees going up against the Royals in the American League Championship Series, and I was able to get the Yankees past the Royals in a 5-game series. You can see very competitive series with 4 of the 5 games being decided by 1 run. Yankees were able to take the last two games at home after being down 2-1 in the series, winning both games 4 and 5 by final scores of 4-3. For some reason in that series, I really seem to have Dan Quisenberry's number. Specifically in Game Five, Quisenberry got the loss in Game Five as he went 2 1/3 innings and allowed 3 runs on 6 hits and 2 walks. So I was able to get the Yankees into the World Series, where in the World Series they were just completely outclassed by the Phillies, getting swept 4 straight, and you could see the results here, where it really wasn't a competitive series at all. In fact, going through it, Yankees never even had a lead at one point in any one of these games. So um, after a 101 win regular season, and actually considering myself lucky to beat the Royals, the ride ended in the World Series with a sweep against the Phillies. So my overall assessment of the season that I played with the 1980 Yankees is, and you could see this with the stats that I provided at the start of the video, is that if you just play the game the proper way, follow the ballpark effects, and follow pitcher's point of weakness, you will come out to pretty similar results that actually happen during the actual season. It's not like I played a 162 game season with the 1980 Yankees and they won, 115 games and swept the Royals in the ALCS and then beat the Phillies in 5 games in the World Series. So it actually makes it more interesting and more challenging to play when you go through the season and you have your ups and downs. You've got your injuries to deal with, and you have to watch pitchers' workloads and things like that. And then you go into the postseason, and let's face it, anything can happen in a short series. You get a lot of weird things happening. Like I said, in the ALCS, just happened to have Dan Quisenberry's number. A lot of that was kind of due to the fact that that Yankee team did have a number of left-handed bats that they would bring off the bench to pinch hit in big situations. And I actually like the fact that I got my head handed to me in the World Series because it just added a sense of realism to the season that I had played. I went into the World Series basically with a broken pitching staff because of playing the 5 game series, and uh, did not have a rested or ready to go pitching staff, as I had to start Gaylord Perry in game 2 of the World Series. So I get swept by the Phillies in that last round. So that's my season with the 1980 New York Yankees. 101 wins in the regular season, American League East champs, beat the Royals in the ALCS, and then swept by the Phillies in the World Series.